All right, so we're going to start today's class. We're going to learn chapter 5 of the laws of mikvah. Very interesting question we're going to discuss today. Yesterday, in yesterday's class, we discussed about a mikvah. How is a mikvah made? It was a very interesting class of what are the basics of mikvah and so on. Today is going to be another interesting topic. So we learned yesterday, once the mikvah is kosher, almost nothing, and it has enough water to be a fully kosher mikvah, nothing could ruin it. The more water you add, it just makes the not good water, it makes the not good water kosher, right? So I have the right 40 saw, whatever it was, 80 gallons, 150 gallons, whatever the measurement is. We discussed that yesterday. I have a full good kosher mikvah. Then water that's not kosher mikvah water, that's drawn water, goes into the mikvah, no problem at all. I got my 40 saw. I'm good to go. You could add as much as you want, and the mikvah is still kosher. And then we had interesting questions. What happens if you put in? What happens if you take out? Today's discussion is a fascinating one, is what happens if the mikvah is not kosher? So you put in disqualifying waters in a mikvah that hasn't hit the 40 saw mark yet. Now you messed everything else up. How can you fix it? In other words, how can you remedy it? And what happens if you start adding enough 40 saw of good water into a bad mikvah? Does everything become nullified to the bad? You know where we have this, by the way, just similar deal, which we have this every Friday when we make Kiddush, right? When Rabbi Chazanov makes Kiddush, or Rabbi Shmuel's not been making Kiddush, and you want some of the Kiddush wine, what do? They pour the new wine from the bottle, because there's not enough wine, into the wine cup the person made Kiddush, and it becomes nullified, so then you can keep on adding and adding and adding. It doesn't matter. That original wine keeps on spreading between the other ones. It's something with a kosher mikvah. You add. That original kosher everything you add will become kosher too. But the question in today's Rambam is, does it work? How does it work the other way? When the mikvah is not kosher and you're adding kosher water, does it keep on disqualifying it? And that's going to be the question that we have. Now remember, there's a few magical numbers here. Number one is a kosher mikvah is 40 saw. That's one thing that you need to know. Disqualifying water, as we said, is 3 lugim. 3 lugim, and the amount that is, what did we say? It was about 35 ounces, 35 ounces of disqualifying water. That is substantial enough to ruin the mikvah. So if the mikvah had already been 40 saw, kosher mikvah, then you added 35 ounces of disqualifying of drawn water. Remember, because we said it has to be water from heaven, straight from nature, from a river, from the sky came down. But if you put in 35 ounces before it got to the magical number of 40 saw, that will disqualify it. If it's less than that, then it's not such a problem. So let's see the questions that Rambam analyzes today in detail. What we established yesterday starts questioning the different details and explaining it. Mikvah. That fell on it the magical number of disqualifying water of 35 lugim of water. Where's my mouse? Oh, there it is. Mikvah mikvah that fell on it 3 lugim, these 35 ounces of mayim she'uvim, of drawn water. And we said we can't use human intervention handled water, drawn water. B'kli echad. So he did it from one vessel. So the mikvah didn't have enough water yet. It wasn't the magical number 40 saw. And you started adding, you wanted to get it to the 40 saw. So you started adding drawn water. You can make the mikvah not kosher. Whether it's b'kli echad, what happens if you start making tricks? I'll add a little bit from this cup, a little bit from that cup. Or actually, he's not doing this intentionally. It happened by mistake. Someone was drinking a cup of water. A cup of water fell in 8 ounces. Then another cup fell in, another 8 ounces. So it happened from 2 or 3 cups. And it fell into the not finished mikvah. They were trying to fill up the mikvah of 40 saw. And then 8 ounces, another 8 ounces. But it was from 2 or 3 cups fell in. So do we say that 2 and 3 cups are considered enough together to create the 35 ounces to disqualify the mikvah? It's starfin, those 2 or 3 cups, if they add up to 35 ounces to 3 lugim, that will disqualify your mikvah, since it never had the magical number of 40 saw. However, if this happened by mistake, it had to happen where one cup fell in and another cup fell in, one after another. In other words, the flow of drawn water kept on flowing in. So in other words, if a guy dropped by mistake a cup of water of 8 ounces in, and then another guy dropped 20 ounces in, but it wasn't together, they will be nullified one at a time into the mikvah. Or if it happened with 4 vessels, even though if it was one after another. As the first cup finishes pouring in the first 8 ounces, the next cup pours in the next 8 ounces, but it takes 4 cups and they were all by mistake, then those 4 cups won't unite to create the 35 ounces of drawn water to make it non-kosher, and then the mikveh will be kosher. It's fine. So as long as it's 4, once you get to past 3 cups or 4 cups, even though one is successively one after another being poured in, that won't disqualify the mikveh. But when do we say this? This whole thing that we're going to allow you to split it up into 4 cups and the non-kosher water not to disqualify the mikvah when it wasn't intentional, that you weren't trying to fill up the mikvah using that. So by mistake, people poured in different cups. It happened one right after another. It's kosher because it happened with 4 different cups. It was so divided of the non-mikvah water falling in there. It's kavan that Rabbi says, man, mikvah. But if you intended, this is a plan. I have a plan. I need to fill up my mikvah, right? We need to use the mikvah. We're waiting for rainwater. We don't want to wait any longer. Let's do a trick. We'll have 20 guys stand there, each with 35 guys stand there, each with a shot glass with a 1 ounce cup. One will pour it in after another. I feel enough for mishkal dinar. That doesn't work. If you're intending to fill up your mikveh water through non-mikveh kosher water, through drawn water, I feel enough for mishkal dinar b'chal shana. Even if 1 year only a coin, the size of a coin of drawn water fell in, and you did it really, really slow, since you're intending to add drawn water to the non-drawn water to the kosher mikveh water, that will all add up because it's intentional here. Whether you started off your mikvah with the drawn water, or you first had a lot of kosher water in the mikvah, the non-drawn water, and you just needed 35 more ounces, and you top that off with drawn water, or they got mixed in together. You put a hose in, which is considered drawn water, and you had rainwater. They're both flowing in at the same time. Doesn't matter. Since before you had the magic number of 40 saw, you had drawn water mixed in together with the non-drawn water. Before you had the already established mikvah 40 saw, nifsu hakol, that's all disqualified. V'nasu shav is considered drawn water. So it's a big problem. If you don't hit the magic number of 40 saw yet, you don't have a full kosher mikvah, and you start to mess around and add to it drawn water. In many cases, it will be a problem because you created the original 40 saw using the help of 35 ounces of 3 lugim of drawn water. It's a problem unless it's less than 3. We'll see. Unless that it's less than 35 ounces. In other words, you had a little bit of help, but not 35 ounces to create the 40 saw, or it happened by mistake and from so many different cups that each cup was kind of nullified at a time. Then it won't be an issue in that case. Okay, continuing on, halacha number 2. Different ways now. He's going to give you examples of how water, again, it won't be combined. You know how like from the watering plants, there are a bunch of holes that are pouring out. Doesn't matter. It's coming out of one jar. He's going to say, and therefore, all the different ways that water is put in, it's going to disqualify the mikveh. Let's see. The second law. There were 2 guys there. One of them stood with a log and a half of the 35 ounces, and the other one had a half of the 35 ounces. It wasn't even the same person. It was 2 different people. Doesn't matter. It's going to disqualify the mikveh because you're going to have at the end of the day 3 lugim, 35 ounces of drawn water that they're pouring in. But so don't try to get away with having 2 people do with 2 different guys. It's not going to help you get away from the fact that you have a total of 3 lugim of drawn water creating your 40 saw of your mikveh. Another idea. A guy had clothes that was all wet, so he sticks his clothes in a pool, which is non-kosher water, which is drawn water, fills up his clothes. He brings his clothes over the mikveh, and when you have wet clothes, it drips out, not in one shot, all over the clothes. Like a very wet clothes, it's dripping all over and becomes habit from many different places. But the problem is, it's coming from one clothes to begin with. If you have that kind of the watering plant thing that it has many holes, projecting the water is coming out of many holes, they will disqualify your mikveh. So even though it's dripping out of the shirt from many different places, not a one-shot stream coming down, giving the full 3 lugim of drawn water to the mikveh to disqualify it, doesn't matter. These ways are all non-kosher. So that's very interesting. So again, before you've established the mikveh with the 40 saw, all these ways will disqualify it. Even these different tricks you're doing will disqualify it unless done correctly, that the 35 lugim of drawn water will disqualify if that's the part of the original 40. Halacha number 3 is going to give you cases which it's kosher. This way, in halacha 3, I'll give you some examples of how the water is so different in the drawn water that it will be nullified within the almost 40 saw that's there in the mikvah. Hamat bil kara kesses. You have a problem. The guy goes, remember, even the pillows, he wants to, he's putting a pillow in a mikvah. Or so maybe he's doing it to make it pure, because those are the halachas we learned, the previous halachas in the Rambam, that they would, if a pillow, they wanted to make it pure and it was touched by an impure person, like so they had a cushion, you had a cushion on your couch. Shalar, they were made out of leather. The mikvah, the problem is he came to use a mikvah to make his pillow and his clothing pure that were impure. The problem is this mikvah had exactly 40 saw. And then what happens when you put a cushion in the water? It soaks up all the water. So now he has a gallon of the mikvah water in the thing. He picks up that pillow, we got a major problem. Now the mikvah only has 39 saw, because a saw of the water is in your cushions and is in your pillow. Okay, so now you're going to squeeze it, you're going to let the water back in, but you have a problem now because the water is considered drawn water, human handled water, and we know the original 40 saw has to be directly from nature. As soon as you pull that pillow out of the water or the cushion, all of a sudden now I have human handled water. And now that water is going to fall back in the mikvah and disqualify the mikvah. So Kate said, Yatsa, what should the guy do if he needs to put his pillow in the mikvah, but he doesn't want to disqualify the whole saw that the pillow is going to soak up? He says, this is what you should do. Pull the cushion out. Always let a little bit of the cushion touch the mikvah water. Then since some of the cushion, the pillow is touching the mikvah water, it's considered like it's part of the mikvah. It's never considered like you fully withdrew it and handled it and took out of the mikvah. Since part of it's touching the mikvah, the whole pillow is considered like it's in the mikvah. The water is touching the water in the pillow. The water in the mikvah is touching the water that's touching the water in the pillow. And that is, you'll squeeze and then let the pillow dry, squeeze out all the water from the pillow in that way. And then you pull out the last drop. However, if you have like a basket or a sack, it doesn't really retain the water, and it's not, a cushion may be meant to hold water. It's like a sponge. But these other sacks, they're totally not meant to hold water. Even as you lift it out, some of the water will come out with it. We don't care, because those kinds of materials are not really made to soak up a lot of water. And therefore, those materials, even if water comes out and you want to have exactly 40 saw, we don't consider that handled water, because those kinds of sacks are never intended to soak up water. And therefore, it's not going to be a problem. Okay, we have 11 halachas today. We're going to go now on to halacha 4. Very interesting cases that Amman is bringing to question if it will disqualify the mikvah. What's the next case? It's going to be an interesting case, halacha 4. You had 3 cavities next to the mikvah. So imagine you have like a mikvah, a pool, a jacuzzi size, whatever size the mikvah is, and you're starting to fill it up. You want rainwater to fill it up. Now the problem is, right next to the mikvah, there's 3 cavities, like little holes next to the mikvah, and in those holes are drawn water. Now you're concerned that as the rainwater starts to fill up your mikvah, and it doesn't hit 40 saw yet, what happens if the mikvah touches the rainwater that's next to the pool? The cavity of drawn water will touch the mikvah water. Their touchings will touch at a certain point before it gets enough rainwater to make it 40 saw, and that could be a problem. Halacha 4. Mikvah she'esh b'shalish gumers. There was 3 pockets, 3 holes. Mimayim she'uvim of drawn water. Loig b'chol guman. Each of those holes had a loig. Now, which each of those pockets next to the mikvah had a log of water, and there was 3 of them, so that means there's 3 log of disqualifying water. And it fell into the mikvah kosher water. In Yadua, you have to know, before the mikvah waters touch the non-good mikvah water pockets next to it, they had already the 40 saw necessary, and only then after it touched the pockets of drawn water next to it, Shadem, it's kosher. Actually, Eagle Guma, Hashish is kosher, not possible. But if you don't know for sure, if you're saying you suspect that maybe my mikvah water, before it had 40 saw, touched the 3 pockets of drawn water next to it, before it had its original 40 saw, that means it was disqualified before it got to the magical number of 40 saw, and therefore the whole mikvah will be not kosher because it was disqualified before it could become a mikvah. And by the way, you know what happens when the disqualifying water touches the 40 saw, the 39 saw before it gets 40 saw? It ruins the whole 39 saw. Now the whole 39 saw mikvah is now considered disqualified water because it had the 35 ounces of drawn water thrown into it before it got the 40 saw. The whole 39 saw is considered as if as if it is disqualifying water, and we have a major problem on our hands. We're basically going to have to clean out the whole mikvah and start over again. Let's see. Halacha hey, shnei mikvahs. What happens if there were two mikvahs? There were two mikvahs. Each mikvah didn't have 40 saw. You had two mikvahs next to each other. You're waiting for the rainwater to fill it up. There's two mikvahs right next to each other, like we have, a men's mikvah and a women's mikvah. Imagine there were two mikvahs right next to each other, and they're starting to be filled up with rainwater. Now you're eventually going to connect. You'll see in the story these two mikvahs are going to be connected to each other. But before you connected it, one of the mikvahs fell a log and a half of drawn water, and the other mikvah had a log and a half of drawn water. So each mikvah is not disqualified because it never had the 3 full log to disqualify it. But then in the Shnei mikvah, so the two mikvahs got connected, and now so together they have 40 sub, but they also have a problem because together they also have the 3 log of disqualifying water. The mikvahs are kosher. The two mikvahs, since each of the two mikvahs never had the full disqualifying measurement in there, they never were established to be non-kosher mikvahs, pasul mikvahs that are drawn water. They always only had a little bit enough, so little in it that the mikvah always stayed kosher. Then when the mikvah touched it, you right away had the 40 sub between both mikvahs, and now it's not a problem, even though you have the 3 lug of disqualifying water. Since at that moment you have the 40 sub kosher waters, the mikvah is going to stay kosher. However, but if you had 2 mikvahs and one mikvah and the mikvah did not have yet 40 sub, and into that mikvah, before it hit the magical number of 40 sub kosher rainwater of non-drawn water, fell into it the 3 lug, the 35 ounces of drawn water. Now you took that non-kosher mikvah, didn't have the 40 sub, it had exactly 3 log of drawn water in there, and you split that in 2. You made a wall in between them. You split the water into 2 cavities. And you said, look, now I split the mikveh in half. Since it only has 3 log of drawn water in there, by splitting it in half, now each one has a log and a half of the drawn water. And then what you did was you added the 40 saw of kosher rainwater in each one of them. They're still not good. They're still not kosher. Once, as I started before, I explained this halacha. Once the non-rainwater, the drawn water, fell into a mikveh, that makes the whole mikveh, all the water in it, considered drawn water. It's as if the whole rest of the water in there was drawn by a vessel. So very interesting. So once 3 lug, 35 ounces of drawn water fall into a thing of water that doesn't have 40 saw, the entire mikveh is considered like it's drawn water. And it doesn't matter how much water you'll add afterwards. You're right now, the more water you add to it, the more that water becomes drawn water too. Halacha number 6. Bar shehumale mayim. Halacha number 6, we're going to learn about what do you do how do you solve the problem now? So you have a pit that had 3 lug of drawn water in it, and the whole water now is considered drawn water. What happens if you have a stream starting to come through it? Is the stream going to make that water kosher now, or every water that comes is going to be considered as if it's drawn water? So let's see. Bar shehu mali mayim, a pit that was full of water, she'uvim, drawn water, and a river starts flowing into this pit. So you have a big river, you have a lot of water, but the original cavity of the mikveh has no drawn water in there. And the water's coming in and out because water's going in and water's going out. It's going to be always pasul, not good for a mikveh, until you make sure that enough water came in and enough water went out, that it pushed, so much water came in and out that it pushed out all the original non-kosher water, because that you make sure that there's less than 3 lug, that there's no lasting of the original non-kosher water of 3 lug, and the new water from this river that's flowing, pushes everything out. It's all new water. You could have a little bit less than 3 lug of the original water, and then the mikvah is kosher. Mikvah shenafal l'teicha mayim shuvim. A mikvah that you had a good mikvah, a mikvah that fell into it mayim shuvim, drawn water, v'nifsal, so it's non-kosher. And you had a mikvah with non-kosher water. You say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to add rainwater until the new rainwater is going to be 40 sa. Doesn't help you because every time you add water, the original drawn water will make the new water drawn water. Actually, until you get rid of the whole water that was in the mikveh and you have less than 3 lugim, then you could start adding water to the mikveh. Ketzad, how does this work? You're going to explain. Mikveh shesh be'etzim sa. For example, let's say the mikveh had 20 sa of make shamim of rainwater in them. And now for the teichi sa mayim, and all of a sudden 1 sa of drawn water, it's you fill the mikveh up halfway of kosher water, of kosher mikveh water. Then 1 sa of drawn water fell in. Now it disqualified the whole mikveh. And then you added another 20 sa. Doesn't help because the original whole 21 sa, that the original 21 sa that's in there, they're all considered drawn water. You have to make sure that the original 20 plus the plus 20 plus up till minus 3 lug is out of there, and then you could start making a kosher. Every mikvah has a puzzle. Says something interesting. He says, look, what happens if you have one mikvah that became puzzle that had the 3 lug of drawn water in it, and you had another mikvah that is kosher, and then you made a hole between the 2 mikvahs and connected them? The good mikvah will purify the non-good mikvah. So in other words, if you're going to add water to the original mikvah, it's no good. But if you make another mikvah next to the non-kosher mikvah that's kosher, and then you make a hole between the 2 mikvahs and you connect the 2 of them, then the already established kosher mikvah will touch the non-kosher mikvah, and that's a way you can make the non-kosher mikvah kosher by having the kosher mikvah touch. A few more halachas he's going to discuss in what happens when water is spritzed. You know how, like we said, well, what happens if you push water unintentionally into the mikvah? You're getting rid of dirt and mud out of the mikvah, and by doing that, you're handling the water. You're lifting it up now, so the water becomes handled, and you're dropping it back down. Will that disqualify the mikvah? Let's see. Halacha zayin 7. If you're just pushing mud to the side, and you push so much water to the side that you're trying to clean the mikvah from dirt, but meanwhile also water is going out of the mikvah, and you push so much water aside. That means you handle, by pushing the water to the side, you handle 3 luga that will disqualify, make it handle the water. Hareza kosher, it's kosher because you're not actually lifting up the water, taking it out with a vessel out of the water. You're just pushing it to the side. It's not a problem. If you actually take your hand, lift up the mud, and then it drops down, you're dealing with the mikvah, and you separated it from the mikvah, let's see to the side. If you put it right next to the wall, that it falls right back in, but you have literally you didn't just push the mud to the side. You handled it with your hand. There's so much human intervention that is going to make that the mikveh is possible, and it's not good. Okay, 4 more halachas. But in a case, if you're just pushing the water to the side, we said that's not considered handled water. And here's more examples of when water is splashed, that it's not, if you splashing water, it's not considered handled. Let's see. Guys, so you had legions passing through, soldiers were passing through. Or a bunch of animals ran through somewhere. And as they're running through, and they came into puddles and they started kicking water into your mikvah. And it came, so much was spritzed into your mikvah, making it that you're trying to make, that it's sprinkled in the 3 lugim l'mikvah. It's kosher, it's kosher. You don't have to worry about these 3 lugim of water because they weren't handled. They would just kick animals or people, soldiers were running by. They sprinkled water into your wanted to be mikvah. That doesn't want to disqualify. Not just that. If you, let's say, had a cavity next to a lake and you were waiting for the rain to come and fill it up, but meanwhile, a whole group of animals ran by and they kicked so much that they pushed so much water from the lake into your mikvah, it's not considered handled because splashing is not considered like you handled it. It's not considered human intervention, and therefore you're not going to have a full kosher mixture. If they splashed enough water into your mikvah that it made it 40 sa, it could be kosher because it's not considered handled. Halacha test, halacha number 9. Now he gets into actually this is the last halacha. This is the last one. It's somewhat complex, but let's see if we can do it. It's an interesting halacha, it makes it complex. Everything we've been discussing till now is where was it drawn water or not drawn water? Here we're going to add an interesting spin to the story. Not just was the water you're adding drawn water, which would disqualify a mikvah because it can't be drawn water, it was even impure. Remember, the purpose of a mikvah is to make things that are impure pure. You stick something impure in, and that makes the items pure. But the water you use is not just problematic because it's drawn, but now it's even worse. It's considered impure water. What happens if you do this? So the Rambam is going to discuss that now. A mikveh that doesn't have the full 40 saw, because if it had 40 saw, I don't care. You could put impure water in there. You could put drawn water in there. The mikveh is already a mikveh. It will make everything else kosher. But the problem is here, the mikveh didn't have the 40 saw. It was missing a little bit. Now fell into there, not the magical number of 3 lugim. It was a little bit less than that, because that would for sure disqualify it if it was drawn. But it was a little bit less than 3. But it was mayim tmeim and she'uvim. It was both impure water and it was drawn water. So usually if it was drawn water and it was less than 3 lugim, no problem. But here it's a little worse, because it was less than 3 lugim, didn't have that magical number to disqualify it, but it was also impure and it was also drawn. So listen, why are you asking me this question? What is the effect? Well, the impure water, we can't use impure water to make challah out of it, because challah is going to be holy. We're going to donate part of it to the kohen. We can't use it for truma because the kohen needs to eat it in purity. But it's not a problem, because since it was, we know in Jewish law that majority takes out the minority. So the truma, you could still use it to wash negelvasser in the morning, wash your hands. You could use it for the kohen. You could use it to make challah, because regarding impurity, even though a certain, 35 ounces or 33 ounces, it was a little bit less than 35 ounces, 33 ounces fell into 100 gallons, it's so little that it's nullified, and therefore that water could still be used for challah, for truma, and to wash your hands. However, you can't make a mikvah out of them. Why not? Usually you could make a mikvah out of it if it doesn't have 3 lugim, if it has less than 35 ounces of drawn water. Because since it's both, since you're using water that A is drawn and B it's impure, we do not want you establishing a mikveh out of the base being made from water, even though it was less than 35 ounces, less than 3 lug. Since it's impure too, we already don't like that fact. However, if so much water went on them, that basically, I think this is on the how I understand the commentary there. If the mikvah, when this rain impure water fell in there, was less than half a mikvah, was less than 20 saw, and it disqualified the less than 50% of the mikvah, and then you added 51% of kosher mikvah water to it, it's fine, it'll be good, because the original basis of the mikvah with the impurity and drawn water was less than 50% needed to create this mikvah. We're not worried about it. But if the drawn water, guys who's joining, we're almost done with the Rambam part of the class, but if drawn water was impure and it already had 51% of what you wanted to create as the basis for the mikvah, that's too much. That will disqualify, even though it didn't have the 35 ounces, the 3 lug, it's already too much, and we don't want to create our mikvah based off that. However, if 3 whole lugim, the 35 ounces, the magical number of disqualifying water fell into it, before, again, became a mikvah, before it had the full 40 saw, shuvim tmeim, and they were also drawn water and they were impure, all of a sudden you can't use the water not for challah, you can't use it for truma, you can't wash your hands for it, because you can't make a mikvah out of it. Now, usually, if you remember, just going to share this almost the last point here. If you remember, we learned the interesting halacha with impurity, with things becoming impure, that you have to want the water on it. If you don't want the impure water, if you don't want the liquid on it, it doesn't make it impure. So usually it would have been nullified. Even 3 lugim, 35 ounces of impure water would have not made the rest of the water impure, would have been nullified, especially that it's in the ground and it's considered mikvah water that's not drawn in a vessel. But since, very interesting rule, since the water as a mikveh drawn water is disqualifying the mikveh because it's drawn, it will also affect the impurity and make things impure that it wouldn't normally make impure. I don't know if everyone's following me. It's a very interesting law. And if you had, though, a lot more rainwater came on top of the mikveh that had the drawn water in it, regarding the impurity, you could use that for challah, for truma, to wash your hands, because it's a minority and a majority, and they don't make things impure when it's unintentional, and you have enough kosher water against it, rainwater against it. Psulin, however, it's no good to make a mikvah out of them, because once you had the 3 lugim there, before you had the 40 saw, it's not kosher. Until the whole original water that was disqualified by 3 lugim left. Until you get rid of the original, to make a mikvah out of it, you have to get rid of all the original water together with the 3 lugim, until you have less than 3 lugim remaining in there of the drawn water from the original whole mikvah, and then you could add to it and make it kosher. Almost done. He says an interesting law now. If you had a mikvah that was almost perfect, it wasn't missing 35 ounces, it was missing not even an ounce, it was missing just 1 coin size of that 40. So you're missing literally drops. And then into that mikvah that was just missing a drop more of rainwater. You couldn't wait, and you started filling up the mikvah with drawn water. You put your hose in and started filling it up. The water's tummy. Since the water was impure and it was drawn, the whole mikvah now is possible. And you can't use it as a basis for a mikvah because you have 3 drawn. You didn't have the 40 saw, and you started putting in this impure and drawn water. It disqualifies the whole mikvah. However, since a very interesting law, since the whole mikvah was only missing a tiny drop, if you didn't put the full 3 logan of drawn impure water in, you put a little bit less than that, and then make sham the kosher, and then you put the coin, the few drops of mikvah, kosher mikvah in, it's going to be pure for everything, because it was so little water that was needed in it to make it kosher. Once you put that in, since you never had the full 3 lugim of disqualifying water, the mikvah will be kosher. And that is the end of today's fast.